on a brand new podcast. We're calling this Top 25 Voter Pod.
Where we never mail it in.
As opposed to voter fraud, yes. We have alongside me, on my screen right there, he's probably right there, Chad Conine. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you. I vote in the women's poll.
That's right. You vote in the women's poll. You are the beat writer for the Baylor Lady Bears here at the Trib. And then below us, always below us, is John Werner, who votes in the top 25 men's basketball poll and covers the Baylor men's basketball team, both of whom are in the top 10 in the country. Welcome, John.
Were you talking about us being like a top 10 voter?
Oh, absolutely. You never show up on that poll stalker.
Gotcha.
Which, is that even a thing on the women's side? I don't know. It might be.
I've had my share of Twitter call outs.
There you go.
Mostly by Iowa State fans, which it's I've become the Iowa State fan villain.
They like to anybody associated with Baylor, and I know we're not really associated with Baylor, we cover Baylor, but they come at them hard, Iowa State fans. So guys, you guys do cover the Baylor teams. Both of them had highly successful seasons last year that got cut short because of COVID and the NCAA tournaments getting canceled. As we, try to project out, which is a scary thing to do in 2020, 2021. But what are the chances that either of these Baylor teams moves up to number one before the end of the season? Chad, I'll start with you. Lady Bear.
Well, with the women, it's hard to. I mean, obviously, there could be teams that lose in front of you. That's the number one way to move up in the poll. That's the normal way. People in front of you lose, you move up, right? I mean, there are some merit-based votes always, but most of the time, a couple teams lose in front of you, you move up a couple spots. And I think that, that's a possibility, especially when you look at South Carolina playing in the SEC, NC State playing the ACC, and they're going to play probably some higher ranked teams, that have a chance to beat them. Stanford, will have to play UCLA and Oregon, so they could lose the game. They're ranked number one right now. I've been voting, based on my own poll and my own previous voting record. I've been voting NC State number one, and they're actually tied for number three. But they had the best win of the year. They went to South Carolina when South Carolina was number one and beat them there. So that's, I think, merit-based. NC State's number one right now. But, when it comes to Baylor and their chance to move up, it's all going to come down to two games against Texas and how high can Texas get ranked? Because if Texas can keep winning and Baylor beats them twice, that's going to look really good on Baylor's resume, both for rankings and the potential to move up to number one and the chance to get a number one seed. And it looks like, Bryce, I might be staying with your family in the San Antonio area for the whole month of March and April.
Yeah, no doubt.
It ends up in San Antonio.
I've got several. I've got several options down there. So
I might probably wear out my welcome pretty quick.
Well, we'll just bounce you around between the different spots. So
okay.
You mentioned something that's key there, I think, Chad, and that's those games against Texas. I've said for a long time that one of the things that sort of holds Baylor back almost from a poll perspective is the fact that the Big 12 has been pretty top heavy in terms of it's been the Lady Bears and the Lilliputians, I mean, they just haven't really had that strong of a conference in the last, really since A&M left, honestly. And
I'll tell you what it is. The women's basketball recruiting isn't quite as sophisticated from a ranking standpoint as football and men's basketball, or especially football. I mean, nothing is, let's be honest, in terms of 3 stars and all of that, and how in the plethora of 3 stars. And in football, you'll have 3 stars that are offered by all Power 5 teams, and then you might have a 3-star that's getting offers from like La Tech and Lamar, right? But in women's basketball, Baylor and UConn and probably Oregon and a handful of other programs, I don't know in the time that I've been covering Baylor that they've got a commitment from or signed anybody that was less than a top 50 national player. You know, and the other Big 12 schools, they're recruiting 3 stars. You know, if they get a 4-star, 5-star, it's a big deal for them. I mean, you know, and at Baylor, it's almost like non-McDonald's All-Americans need not apply. And so when you have that kind of talent gap, you're going to run away from everybody like they have.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's a different way, I think, of thinking for some of these top players because, you know, I think a lot of times in the men's game, you'll see that talent spread out a little more evenly because those guys are like, man, I'm going to go over here where I can maybe get some run, get some playing time. It seems like the women are like, I'm going to go over here where we can win a national championship, you know, and so that becomes you see the UConns and the Baylors and others, like you mentioned, Oregon stockpiling a lot of talent. Johnny, how about the men?
You know, Bryce, I think they have a really good shot in the next couple of weeks. I'd say a great shot, but they've got to sweep this schedule, which, okay, they play TCU on the road Saturday. Then their next 3 games are at home against West Virginia, at Texas Tech, and then Kansas at home. If they win those 4 games, they're going to be number 1. I don't care what Gonzaga does. They're going to be number 1. And
now you better not put that game in the bank, that game tonight in the bank quite just yet.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, after tonight is what I'm saying.
Right.
But yeah, so Gonzaga has played the toughest part of its schedule. It's already beaten Kansas, West Virginia, Iowa, and Virginia. I mean, those are some pretty heavyweight teams they've beaten. And, you know, it's just too bad Baylor and Gonzaga wasn't able to play on December 5th in Indianapolis. And I'm still hoping that game will be rescheduled at some point.
Oh, yeah. But, that would be a win for college basketball if they're able to get that game in.
Right. But, you know, Baylor's schedule gets a lot harder. And, you know, if they win some of those games, and they may not even have to win all of them, I think they've got a pretty good shot.
Yeah, which kind of leads me into my next question. John, scroll your screen down just a little bit so we don't get as much of the ceiling. There you go. We'd rather show our lovely viewers more of you.
I don't know about
so, you know, you hit on something there. Obviously, from the men's perspective, the Big 12 actually benefits Baylor in that it is loaded with really top teams. So, Johnny, I mean, what's the strongest conference out there in terms of men's basketball?
I think it's probably up for grabs between the Big 12 and the Big 10. The Big 12 has 5 teams in the top 18 teams. Baylor, number 2, Texas 4, Kansas 6, West Virginia 14, Texas Tech 18. So that's pretty strong. And really, and there's a couple other teams that are, you know, have a chance to get in there. Oklahoma State. Those are really good teams too. So it's a really strong conference. The Big 10 is really strong too. Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, several other teams are really good. And Michigan State, they're always good. And but yeah, I think those 2 conferences stand quite a bit ahead of the rest. ACC has 5 teams in the top 25, but their highest ranked team, this is kind of weird, Virginia Tech is number 19. So those 5 teams are from 19 through 25. So and Duke hasn't played in at least probably about a month or so. So but yeah, and I think the conference really helps Baylor.
God, Duke is, I mean, that's just a glaring example of what's wrong with rankings is that Duke is still number 21 at 3-2. I mean, that's a joke. Who's voting for Duke?
Voting for them. To me, to be ranked, you got to play.
Yeah. Now, it is a COVID season, so you know.
Well, I mean,
here we've got Ohio State in the national championship football game, and certainly didn't play as many games as everyone else, and yet proved to be one of the best teams. So, I do think there's an argument there that, like we've said on a lot of things, it's hard to judge teams, players, coaches in a COVID season.
Well, that's true. I want to ask you. I don't want to harp on the Duke thing because we could go round and round. But when you look at the Big 12 and you look at how good Oklahoma and Oklahoma State have been, even in spots probably 6 and 7. Do you think the Big 12 is looking at 7 teams in the tournament potentially?
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
I'd say right now, it's probably definite. But
Yeah.
We'll see how things go.
Just keep your head above 8, then you'll be all right.
Yeah. I think 7's a pretty potential number for the Big 12.
So, Chad, on the women's side, who is a conference that usually stands out as the top there?
Well, I think the SEC in women's basketball kind of is a little bit like the SEC in football. They get a lot of credit, but they produce a lot of good teams. And when you look at the rankings this year, even though the SEC, South Carolina's at 5 now, which South Carolina started the season, I think, at number 1 and finished the season number 1 last year. But in between 5 and 14, you've got South Carolina, Texas A&M, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Mississippi State. And I feel like any of those teams can challenge and beat any of the others on any given night. Baylor went to Arkansas and lost a game. Although I think Baylor probably had the better team. It got into a little bit of that officiating situation where a game is going to be called a certain way and one team's able to take advantage of that. I don't know if either of y'all watched that game, but Arkansas was doing that thing where the driver bodies up just long enough to get a shot off, and then they send him to the line time after time after time. And I think Arkansas shot something like 38 free throws that night, and won by 5, and Baylor shot 18 free throws. So basketball is, the officials will drive you crazy in basketball. Bryce, you and I were just talking about the other night about technicals in the NBA and how that affected the Rockets Mavericks game the other night. But not to stray too far off subject though, the SEC looks really good. The ACC, of course, has Louisville and NC State there, and I'm voting NC State number 1 right now, and Louisville has been really good and is really good. So those conferences are really strong, and the catch-22 or the other side of that double-edged sword is when you're Louisville or NC State and you're trying to get to that number 1 spot, you've got to play the other one, right? Or you've got to go play some of these other teams that are ranked, and especially the SEC. If South Carolina is trying to climb back to number 1, that's the great thing about college basketball, though, is you don't got to climb to number 1. If you can climb to number 4, you get yourself a number 1 seed. But even if you don't do that, I mean, it's anybody's game, and even though it's going to be weird this year, and it's not going to be my favorite thing like it always is, like the NCAA tournament is always my favorite sporting event of the year, and it's going to be a little bit weird this year, and maybe it won't be my favorite sporting event of this year, but I think it's still gonna happen and come to fruition, and I'll say more about that in a second.
So, John, as you mentioned, the Big 12 on the men's side has 5 teams in the top 18. That's pretty strong. Baylor, Texas, Kansas, West Virginia, and Texas Tech. We just saw Texas make a bit of a jump because they knocked off the Jayhawks. What do you envision? Do you envision more shuffling, among those 5, or like you said, even at Oklahoma and Oklahoma State? Do you see a lot of movement as the season progresses?
Yeah, I think Baylor's going to be up in the top 10 all year, probably. I think, Texas is a real intriguing team to me. I don't think anybody knew they'd be this good. but they really are good. I mean, they beat Kansas 84-59 at Allen Fieldhouse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hardly anybody goes in there and wins, and nobody before Texas has beaten Self like that, a Self team like that in Lawrence. So I think they've got a really good team. That's another shame. Baylor's supposed to play Texas
Mm-hmm.
here mid-December. That would have been a fantastic game. But they're going to reschedule it for the last week of the season in March, early March. So that might be the game that decides it.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. But that could be a real strong matchup right there. But yeah, I think Oklahoma State's a really good team. They've got Cade Cunningham, probably he could be the top pick in the NBA draft this year. He's definitely a top 3. And, he makes everybody else there better. And they should have beat West Virginia the other day, a couple of days ago. They had a huge lead in the second half, and West Virginia came back. So, I think there's going to be some shuffling just because there's so many good teams.
I also wouldn't count out Kansas, quite yet.
Oh, no.
I was flipping around last night and saw a little bit of Kansas TCU. I might have watched more if it had been a little bit more of a competitive game, but and of course the Jayhawks were thumping them. But Bill Self's teams tend to get better as the season progresses.
Oh yeah,
and they would be just the kind of team that would be motivated by everybody sort of counting them out, and they could slip right up there and win another Big 12 title. How many in a row has it been? Half a jillion? I don't know.
Yeah, well, they lost a couple years.
The Red Raiders and Kansas State ended their streak a couple of years ago.
Okay, that's right.
But hey, the thing about Kansas in this season, and it leads me to another point about men's basketball, if I can pontificate on that for a second. But Kansas has the most distinct home court advantage in the Big 12, and that COVID season, that's kind of out the window,
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a problem for them, I think. And I'm not sure. I don't know, John, you've been covering the Big 12 basketball longer than I have. I'm not sure you've ever had more talent in the conference than you have. I mean, we're talking about Oklahoma State being, this maybe the 6th best team, or fighting their way up into the top 5, maybe, with Cade Cunningham and a guy that wasn't he like the number 1 recruit in the nation or something like that. Yeah. And then Texas Tech has their first McDonald's All-American ever. And Baylor and Kansas and I mean, like a guy like Brady Manick at Oklahoma just gets overshadowed, and they've got some other really good players at Oklahoma, and they're the 6th or 7th best team. And Texas is absolutely loaded. I mean, I don't know that Texas has ever been more loaded. I don't know that, John, has there ever been a time when there was more just straight up talent? And the thing is, nobody just goes out and melts it down on talent. Everybody plays really hard defense. And so it just comes down to who can make, more 3-pointers and who gets more good bounces.
Yeah, Chad, I think across the board, there has not been more talent, across the league. Now, teams like Kansas have kind of hoarded talent, where they had a whole lot of it. But yeah, just across the whole league. Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. That's what makes it fun, every game to watch. Cause I mean, you never know. And like you said, the home court advantage probably won't count as much this year. And that's probably going to hurt Kansas the most, because that's by far the best home court advantage by anybody. So yeah, it's going to be really fun to see how, everything kind of unveils the next couple months.
There has been certainly plenty of talented guys come through the Big 12 and talented teams, but I do tend to agree with y'all that it's more evenly distributed. It's more spread out than it maybe has ever been. I don't know that we have one guy in the league that's better than a Kevin Durant right now, or, maybe a Blake Griffin or somebody like that. We've had some dadgum good players come through this league, Jarrett Culver,
Yeah.
others. Yeah. But,
well, the sport is so guard guard dominated. And so you're not, I mean, you don't have a 7-footer out there playing a 3, you know, as far as I know right now. I mean, that's kind of what Cade Cunningham is like, but
Yeah,
he's not quite 7 foot, I don't think.
So when you guys are looking at your poll votes, you know, for that week, I remember when I voted on the women's poll, you know, what do you kind of look for when especially, I guess the real question might be, you know, 20 to 25, you know, what do you look for in a top 25 team? And Chad, you hit on it a little bit with why you have NC State as high as you do, but you know, what's kind of your own personal voter qualifications?
Yeah, well, this is you know, this is my second year of doing it, and I developed kind of a process where you know, I keep a record of my poll from the last week, and then I go ahead and write that whole poll down on paper so I can go through how they fared and look at the scores, and I can make little marks like, you know, an up arrow if you beat a top 25 team, a down arrow if you lost a game, and particularly if you lost to a non-top 25 team, I might put 2 down arrows. Or if you lost 2 games, I put 2 down arrows. If you lost a game but it was to a team ranked higher than you, I might put an arrow to, you know. So I kind of make little marks like that, and that allows me to say, hey, you know, this team deserves to move up on merit. Now, then you move people down, and obviously people get bumped up because of that. And I think that allows me at least to take a more comprehensive look at what everybody is doing and week to week, and vote based on my poll. I don't think that I want to vote based on what the previous week's top 25 was. I want to keep voting on what my evaluation was and change my evaluation instead of changing based on the top 25. You know, I've heard of these guys that have like rules like they're not going to vote for a team in the top 25 until they've beaten somebody else on the road, you know. So this guy had a logic a couple of years ago that he wasn't going to vote for Team A because they hadn't won a road game yet, even though they'd beaten a good team on a neutral court. But if that, instead of beating that good team on a neutral court, they'd beaten like, you know, a group of 5 team, lower conference group of 5 team on that team's home court, he would have put them in the top 25, and that doesn't make any sense to me. So that's kind of my process, and maybe I'll elaborate more on that as this podcast goes on in coming weeks.
Johnny?
Yeah, I'd say the most important thing to me is strength of schedule. You know, and that's why, you know, you'll see so many Big 12, Big 10, ACC teams. And, you know, a lot of those teams are going to beat each other every week. But to me, you've got to play somebody, you know, to go up. And, you know, there's been teams that, I mean, like a school like St. Louis, they finally got in the top 25, but to me, they just weren't really playing good teams. And to me, to get into the top 25, if you're right on the verge, you either got to have like a really long winning streak, or you've just got to have like a wow win. You know, you beat somebody in the top 25, in the top 10. So, but yeah, to me, strength of schedule is the most important thing.
I think that's good insight. Sounds similar to maybe the way I approached it when I was doing it. And just to show the viewers a little bit of how the sausage is made, the AP, you know, person who's kind of in charge of the poll usually will send the voters an email each week with how the top 25 fared that week, which does help. It, you know, just helped you kind of keep track of, oh yeah, you know, that team beat that team. And, but it is, you know, it is important to do your homework. I think that's a good place to stop for now. As Chad said, we're going to keep this podcast going. I think, you know, we'll, for those people who are really into college basketball, but really maybe poll geeks, I guess, we'll hopefully get into this. But, guys, thanks for jumping on, and we'll see y'all next week.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.